Tonight we will explore the hidden costs of our choices, how the very actions we believe will protect what we cherish can slowly destroy it, how favoritism meant to help can harm, how greed that promises abundance creates scarcity, how shortcuts that seem wise become the longest path of all. There is nothing you need to do tonight, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. The stories we share will unfold like flowers opening at their own pace, each one revealing a truth that has waited patiently for this moment of discovery. If this path of gentle wisdom calls to you, I invite you to subscribe and join our community of seekers who find peace in these ancient teachings. These are stories about karma, not as punishment from above, but as the natural law of cause and effect that flows through every choice we make. Like a merchant who tastes her salt too often and finds her supply gone, we will discover how our own actions create the very problems we meant to avoid. Let us begin this journey together. Take a gentle breath now. Feel your body supported by whatever holds you. Notice how the air moves softly through your lungs, carrying nothing but this moment, this peace, this quiet space where wisdom can find you. Let us explore our first story. In the great desert, where the sand stretched endless as an ocean, there lived a salt merchant named Deepa. She was known throughout the trading cities for the purity of her salt, white as fresh snow, fine as ground pearls, treasured by cooks and healers alike. Every season, when the heat became bearable and the stars aligned for safe travel, Deepa would load her camels with carefully wrapped bundles of salt and set out across the desert. Her caravan would wind through the dunes like a serpent of hope, carrying this precious cargo from the salt flats where she harvested it to the distant markets where it would bring good profit. But Deepa had developed a habit. She worried constantly about the quality of her salt. What if the heat has changed its taste? She would think as the sun climbed high. What if moisture has gotten into the wrapping? What if this batch is somehow different from the last? And so, several times each day, Deepa would stop her caravan. She would unwrap a portion of her carefully packed salt, take a small amount on her finger, and taste it. Just a pinch, she told herself, just enough to be certain. The salt was always perfect, clean and sharp on her tongue, exactly as it should be. This would reassure her for a few hours. But then the worry would return, creeping into her mind like sand into cloth. Perhaps I should check again, she would think. The sun is hotter now. The wind has changed direction. Surely I should be certain. Again, she would stop. Again, she would unwrap the salt. Again, she would taste just a pinch, confirming what she already knew, that her salt was pure and good. Her camel drivers watched this ritual with growing concern. They had worked for many merchants, but none had been so anxious about their cargo. Salt was salt, they knew. It did not change flavor in a day or even a week, but they said nothing, for Deepa was kind to them and paid fair wages. The journey across the desert took 25 days when the route was good and the weather held. Each day, Deepa would stop her caravan 3 or 4 times to check her salt. Each time, she would take what seemed like just a pinch, just enough to be sure. By the 10th day, one of the camel drivers noticed that some of the salt bundles looked smaller. By the 15th day, there was no question. The bundles had shrunk noticeably. "Mistress," the old driver named Kasim said gently as they made camp that night, "perhaps you are checking the salt too often." Deepa looked up from her evening meal, surprised. "Too often? But I only take a tiny amount each time. Surely that cannot matter." Kasim nodded toward the camels, where the salt bundles sat in neat rows. "Look with your eyes, not your worry," he said. "What do you see?" Deepa looked, In the firelight, she could see that several bundles were indeed smaller than when they had started, but this seemed impossible to her. She had been so careful, taking only the smallest pinch each time. "It cannot be my testing," she said. "I take hardly anything at all." Qasim was quiet for a moment, stirring the fire with a stick. "Mistress, may I ask how many times you have checked the salt today?" Deepa thought back through the day. There had been the check just after dawn, when she worried about the night's coolness, then another when the sun grew hot, then again at midday when the wind picked up, and once more in the afternoon when clouds had covered the sun briefly. "4 times, she said. "And yesterday?" She thought again. Perhaps 5 times yesterday, the day before, maybe 3 or 4. "And how much do you take each time?" Qasim asked gently. Deepa held up her finger, showing the amount. It looked so small, hardly worth considering. "May I?" Qasim asked, and when she nodded, he took some salt from his own food pouch, the same amount she had shown him. Then he did it again, and again, and again. By the 4th time, there was a small mound of salt in his palm. "This is what you have taken from 1 bundle today," he said. "Multiply this by 25 days of travel, and by all the bundles you carry." Deepa stared at the salt in Qasim's palm. It was more than she had imagined, much more. But surely it was still not significant compared to the large bundles they carried. That night, she lay awake thinking about Qasim's words. She tried to calculate in her mind, 4 checks a day, times 25 days, times the number of bundles. The numbers were larger than she wanted to admit. The next morning, she decided to test something. She took 1 small bundle of salt and weighed it carefully using her merchant's scales. Then, she measured out exactly the amount she would normally taste in a day, 4 small pinches. When she weighed the bundle again, it was noticeably lighter. For the first time, Deepa began to see what she had been doing. Still, the worry continued to gnaw at her. Knowing that her testing was reducing her cargo did not immediately stop the fear that something might be wrong with the salt. The habit was stronger than her logic. By the 20th day of travel, even Deepa could no longer deny what was happening. The bundles were clearly smaller. When she weighed them, some had lost nearly a quarter of their salt. On the final day of the journey, as the trading city appeared on the horizon like a mirage becoming real, Deepa did something she had never done before. She sat down beside the road and carefully calculated exactly how much salt she had consumed through her constant testing. The number shocked her. In her effort to ensure the perfect quality of her salt, she had eaten nearly half of her profit. When they reached the marketplace, Deepa's heart sank further. The buyers examined her salt, what remained of it, and pronounced it excellent, just as it had always been. But there was so much less of it than there should have been. "Your salt is as pure as ever," said Hakim, the merchant who had bought from her for many years. "But your quantities seem smaller this season. Has the harvest been poor?" Deepa could not meet his eyes. "No," she said quietly. "The harvest was good." That evening, as she counted her coins in the inn where traders stayed, Deepa realized that for the first time in her career, she had barely made enough profit to pay for the journey itself. After covering the costs of camels, drivers, food, and lodging, she had almost nothing left. She sat in her small room, staring at the nearly empty money pouch, trying to understand how this had happened. Her salt had been perfect. Everyone said so. The prices had been fair. The journey had been safe. Everything had gone according to plan, except for one thing. The next morning, as she prepared to return home, Hakim approached her in the market. "Deepa," he said, I have been buying salt for 30 years, and I have noticed something. The merchants who worry most about their salt often have the least to sell." She looked at him, not understanding. "There was a trader who used to come here," Hakim continued, "who would open every bundle twice a day to check for dampness. He would spread it out, examine it, test it, repack it. By the time he reached market, half his salt had been lost to the wind and his constant handling." "But he was being careful," Deepa said. "Yes," Hakim nodded. "He was being very careful. But what was he careful of, and what did his carefulness cost?" Hakim gestured toward the other merchants setting up their stalls. "Look at Salma there," he said, pointing to a woman arranging bags of spices. "She packs her goods once, wraps them well, and does not open them again until she reaches market. Her spices arrive in perfect condition, and she has exactly what she started with." "But how can she be sure they are still good?" Deepa asked. "Because she knew they were good when she packed them," Hakim said simply. "She trusts her own knowledge and her careful preparation. She does not let worry undo her work." Deepa was quiet for a long time. She thought of all the times she had stopped her caravan, all the bundles she had opened, all the small pinches that had seemed so harmless. "The salt was always perfect," she said finally, speaking more to herself than to Hakim. "Yes," he agreed. "Your worry was not protecting the salt, it was consuming it." As Deepa began her journey home, her camels carrying empty bundles and her purse nearly empty as well, she thought about Hakim's words. She had been so focused on the fear that something might be wrong that she had never noticed what her fear was actually doing. Each pinch of salt had been tiny, insignificant by itself, but together, over time, they had consumed what she meant to preserve. Her intention had been good. She wanted to deliver the finest salt possible, but her method had undermined her goal. Rest now and take a gentle breath. Feel how your body is supported, how the air moves easily in and out of your lungs. There is nothing you need to check or verify in this moment. You can simply be here, trusting this space of rest. Let us explore another story. In a prosperous town where merchants and craftsmen prospered, there lived a fabric trader named Yash. He was successful in his business, well respected in the community, and blessed with 2 sons who should have been the pride of his life. The elder son, Arjun, was 25 years old, serious, and hardworking. From the time he could walk, he had helped in his father's shop, learning the trade, understanding the quality of different fabrics, building relationships with suppliers and customers. He worked long hours without complaint and showed natural skill for the business. The younger son, Dev, was 22, charming and quick-witted. He had an easy smile, a way with words, and a lightness about him that drew people to him like moths to a flame. Where Arjun was steady and reliable, Dev was spontaneous and entertaining, and Yash, without fully realizing it, had come to love Dev more. It had started small, as these things do. When the boys were young, Dev's laughter had been more delightful, his hugs more enthusiastic. When he stumbled while learning to walk, Yash had rushed to comfort him. When Arjun stumbled, Yash had said, "Get up. Boys must learn to be strong." As they grew older, the pattern deepened. When Dev made a mistake in the shop, measuring fabric wrongly or being rude to a customer, Yash would laugh it off. "He's young," he would say. "He has time to learn." When Arjun made the same mistakes, Yash's response was different. "You should know better by now. I depend on you to be responsible." When Dev wanted new clothes or money for entertainment, Yash gave it freely. "Enjoy your youth," he would say fondly. When Arjun asked for the same things, Yash would frown. Money must be earned. You cannot expect everything to be given to you. The townspeople noticed this favoritism, though none dared speak of it directly to Yash. They saw how his eyes lit up when Dev entered the room, how his voice warmed when he spoke of his younger son's adventures. They saw how he corrected Arjun's words in front of customers, but ignored Dev's errors. They saw, too, how the boys were responding to this different treatment. Dev, showered with affection and gifts, began to expect such treatment as his natural right. Why should he work hard when his father gave him everything anyway? Why should he learn discipline when charm worked just as well? He started coming to the shop later and later, leaving earlier and earlier, spending his days with friends instead of learning the business. Let Arjun handle the boring work, he would say with his winning smile. I'm better with people anyway. And Yash, delighted by his younger son's confidence, would agree. Yes, yes. Arjun can manage the details. Dev has a gift for making customers happy. But Dev's gift for making customers happy proved to be more about entertaining himself than serving them. He would chat with young women who came to buy fabric, flirt with them, make them laugh, while they waited impatiently to complete their purchases. He would make grand promises about delivery times without checking if they could be met, leaving Arjun to explain the delays and face the customer's anger. Meanwhile, Arjun watched his father's favoritism with growing pain. No matter how hard he worked, how much responsibility he took on, how many problems he solved, his father's affection remained focused on Dev. Slowly, Arjun began to withdraw. He spoke less at family meals. He stopped sharing his ideas for improving the business. He performed his duties competently, but without joy, like a hired worker, rather than a beloved son. When friends invited Arjun to join them for festivals or celebrations, he would decline. I have work to do, he would say. But the truth was that watching other families, seeing fathers who were proud of all their children, had become too painful. Yash noticed Arjun's withdrawal, but misunderstood its cause. You're becoming too serious, he would tell his elder son. Look at Dev. He knows how to enjoy life. You should learn from him. These words, meant as guidance, cut Arjun like knives. Learn from Dev? Learn what? That he was not worth loving? That his efforts were not valued? That his character was somehow lacking compared to his brothers? Years passed this way. Dev, now a young man of 22, had developed into someone who expected the world to serve him. He was often rude to servants, dismissive of people he considered beneath him, and increasingly irresponsible in the shop. Customers began to complain about his attitude and his broken promises. Arjun, now 25, had become distant and cold even toward customers, performing his work with mechanical efficiency, but no warmth. The joy had gone out of him, replaced by a bitter resignation. One day, an old customer named Kamala came to the shop looking for fabric for her daughter's wedding. She had been buying from Yash's family for 20 years and knew both sons well. Dev greeted her with his usual charm. Kamala auntie, you look younger every time I see you. Your daughter is so lucky to have such a beautiful mother to help plan her wedding. Kamala smiled politely, but then asked, Where is Arjun? I was hoping to discuss some special requirements with him. Oh, don't worry about my serious brother, Dev said dismissively. I can handle whatever you need. Arjun just gets bogged down in boring details. But when Kamala explained what she wanted, specific fabrics from particular regions, with certain qualities needed for traditional ceremonies, Dev's knowledge proved insufficient. He made promises he couldn't keep and suggestions that showed he didn't understand her needs. Finally, Kamala asked firmly to speak with Arjun. When he came forward, his manner was respectful but distant. He listened carefully to her requirements, asked thoughtful questions, and provided exactly the information she needed. But there was no warmth in the interaction, no personal connection. As Kamala left the shop, she felt troubled. She had watched these boys grow up, and something had changed in both of them. A few days later, she encountered Yash in the market. "Your sons are both grown men now," she said carefully. "You must be proud of how they've developed." Yash beamed. "Dev is wonderful, isn't he? Such charm, such spirit. He lights up the whole shop when he's there." "And Arjun?" Kamala asked. Yash's expression shifted slightly. "Arjun is reliable, hardworking, but he lacks Dev's natural warmth with people. I worry he's too serious, too rigid. I wish he could be more like his brother." Kamala was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yash, may I tell you something I have observed?" He nodded, though he looked slightly uncomfortable. "I have been coming to your shop for 20 years, Kamala said. "I have watched your sons grow from children to men, and I have noticed that they have both become exactly what you taught them to become." Yash frowned. "What do you mean?" "Dev has learned that he can receive love and rewards without effort, that his charm is more valuable than his work, that rules apply to others but not to him. He has become what you taught him he could be." Yash started to protest, but Kamala continued gently. "And Arjun has learned that his efforts will never be enough to earn his father's love, that his value lies only in his work, not in himself, that he must expect nothing and give everything. He too has become what you taught him to become." The words hit Yash like cold water. "But I love both my sons," he said. "Do you?" Kamala asked. "Or do you love the idea of Dev and endure the reality of Arjun?" That evening, Yash sat in his shop after closing, thinking about Kamala's words. He tried to remember the last time he had praised Arjun's work, really praised it, not just acknowledged it. He tried to remember the last time he had shown Dev the same expectations of responsibility that he placed on Arjun. The memories were painful to examine. He saw pattern after pattern of different treatment, different standards, different expressions of love. He thought of Dev, now so accustomed to special treatment that he barely worked at all. He thought of Arjun, so starved for approval that he had stopped seeking it entirely. Both his sons had been shaped by his choices, and neither had become the man Yash had hoped to raise. Take a gentle breath here and allow your shoulders to soften. Feel how your body rests without effort, how you can simply be present with these stories without needing to fix or change anything. Let the teachings settle like seeds in good soil. Let us explore another story about the unintended consequences of our choices. In the sacred city of Kashi, where pilgrims came from across the land to pray and seek blessings, there lived a Brahmin named Harish. He was renowned throughout the district for the elaborate perfection of his morning prayers, a ritual so complex and precise that other Brahmins would come to observe and learn from his devotion. Each morning, Harish would rise before dawn and begin preparations that would last until the sun reached its full height. He would bathe in the sacred river with specific mantras for each part of his body. He would dress in freshly washed clothes while reciting particular verses. He would arrange his prayer room with flowers picked at exact moments of sunrise, light incense made from rare ingredients, and place offerings of food prepared according to ancient measurements. His prayers themselves were a marvel of memorization and precision. For 3 hours, Harish would recite Sanskrit verses without error, his pronunciation perfect, his intonation exactly as prescribed by the oldest texts. He knew thousands of mantras, hundreds of hymns, dozens of complex rituals. Not once in 20 years had he stumbled over a word or forgotten a sequence. The gods must surely be pleased with such devotion, the other Brahmins said. Harish's dedication was legendary. His knowledge was unmatched. His ritual performances were flawless. But if the gods were pleased with Harish's morning prayers, they were perhaps less impressed with how he spent the rest of his day. Harish employed several servants in his household, a cook named Leela, a cleaner named Gopal, and a young boy named Ravi who helped with various tasks. These servants had learned to stay out of sight during the morning prayer hours, for Harish could not bear any disruption to his sacred routine. But once the prayers were complete and Harish had eaten his carefully prepared breakfast, his treatment of these servants revealed a different aspect of his character. "Leela!" he would shout if his food was not exactly to his liking. "This dal is too thin. How many times must I tell you the proper consistency? Are you trying to displease the gods by serving me inferior food?" Leela, a widow who desperately needed the work to support her children, would hurry to remake the dish, even if it meant she would not eat until evening. "Gopal," Harish would call harshly when he found the smallest speck of dust on a shelf. "If you cannot clean properly, perhaps you should find work more suited to your abilities, if you have any." Gopal, an old man whose hands shook with age, would scrub the house again, though his joints ached with the effort. Young Ravi bore perhaps the worst of Harish's temper. The boy was eager to please, but often made the mistakes that children make, dropping things, forgetting instructions, moving too slowly or too quickly for Harish's tastes. "Worthless boy," Harish would rage when Ravi spilled water while filling the prayer vessels. "The gods see your clumsiness and are offended by it. Perhaps they curse this household because of servants like you." These outbursts would often come just hours after Harish had finished reciting beautiful prayers about compassion, about the divine presence in all living beings, about the duty of the righteous to protect and serve others. The contrast was not lost on the neighbors, though most said nothing. They observed Harish's magnificent morning devotions with respect, and they watched his treatment of his servants with growing discomfort. One day, during the festival season when many holy men passed through the city, a wandering monk came to Harish's door asking for food. Harish was delighted. Feeding holy men was a sacred duty that would surely increase his spiritual merit. "Please, revered sir," Harish said with deep bows, "honor my humble home. Let me offer you the finest meal." He called to Leela. "Prepare the best food immediately. Use the good rice, the pure ghee, the finest vegetables, and be quick about it. Can't you see we have a holy guest?" As they waited for the meal, Harish began describing his spiritual practices to the monk. He spoke of his years of study, his perfect memorization of sacred texts, his daily rituals that took hours to complete properly. "The gods require absolute precision," Harish explained proudly. "Every word must be pronounced correctly, every gesture performed exactly as prescribed. I have never once made an error in my prayers." The monk listened quietly, occasionally nodding. When Leela brought the food, her hands were shaking slightly. She had rushed to prepare the elaborate meal and was nervous about serving such an important guest. As she set down the rice, a few grains spilled onto the mat. Harish's face darkened immediately. "Clumsy woman," he snarled. "Look what you've done in front of our honored guest. Have you no sense of proper behavior? Clean this up at once and try not to disgrace us further." Leela fell to her knees, gathering the spilled rice with trembling hands, her face burning with shame. The monk watched this scene with calm attention. When Leela had left, he turned to Harish. "Tell me about your morning prayers," the monk said. "What do you ask the gods for?" Harish was pleased by the question. "I pray for wisdom, for purity, for spiritual advancement. I pray for the welfare of all beings, for peace in the world, for the blessing of divine knowledge." "Ah," the monk said. "And do you believe the gods hear these prayers?" "Of course," Harish replied. "My pronunciation is perfect. My rituals are flawless. The gods must be pleased with such devotion." The monk took a bite of food, chewed thoughtfully. "This rice is very good," he said. "Your servant cooks well." "Yes, though she can be careless," Harish said, still irritated about the spilled grains. "I am curious about something," the monk continued. "In your prayers, when you ask for the welfare of all beings, does this include your servants?" Harish looked puzzled. "Well, yes, of course. All beings means all beings. And when you pray for divine wisdom, what sort of wisdom do you seek?" "The wisdom to understand divine truth, to see the sacred nature of existence, to recognize the presence of the gods in all things." The monk nodded slowly. "So in your morning prayers, you ask the gods to help you see their presence in all beings and to work for the welfare of all. Is this correct?" "Exactly," Harish confirmed. "Then how do you think the gods feel?" the monk asked quietly. "When they spend 3 hours listening to you pray for wisdom and compassion, and then spend the rest of the day watching you treat your servants with harshness and contempt?" Harish started to respond, then stopped. The question hung in the air between them. "My prayers are perfect," he said finally. "Every word is correct, every ritual properly performed." "Yes," the monk agreed. "Your prayers are technically perfect. But let me ask you this. If prayers that request compassion and wisdom have no effect on how you treat the people around you, then what exactly are those prayers accomplishing?" Harish felt a strange discomfort, as if the ground beneath his certainty was shifting. "The prayers they are pleasing to the gods. They are my sacred duty." "Are they?" the monk asked. "If I spent 3 hours every morning telling you how much I respected and loved you, and then spent the rest of the day being cruel to your family, would you be pleased with my words?" The comparison struck Harish like a physical blow. He had never thought of his prayers and his daily behavior as connected in this way. "But prayer is different," he protested. "It is a sacred practice, separate from worldly concerns." The monk smiled gently. "Is cruelty a worldly concern? Is kindness? Is the suffering of an old man trying to clean your house, or a woman trying to cook your food, or a child trying to serve you? Is this worldly, or is this the very place where the sacred and the ordinary meet?" Harish sat in silence, his mind racing. Everything he had believed about his spiritual practice suddenly seemed less certain. "Let me tell you what I have observed in my travels," the monk said. "I have met farmers who cannot read a single sacred verse, but who treat every person they encounter with genuine kindness. I have met merchants who know no elaborate rituals, but who share their food with strangers and care for the sick. And I have met learned Brahmins whose prayers are flawless, but whose hearts are closed to the suffering around them. Which of these do you think lives closer to divine truth?" The question hung in the afternoon air like incense smoke, spreading slowly through Harish's consciousness. "Are you saying my prayers are worthless?" Harish asked, and for the first time in years, his voice held uncertainty rather than pride. "I am saying that prayers without corresponding action are like beautiful flowers with no fragrance. the monk replied. They may please the eye, but they lack the essence that makes a flower truly what it is meant to be. But if prayers that ask for compassion do not create compassion in the one who prays them, then what value do they have? If prayers for wisdom do not lead to wiser behavior, then are they truly prayers at all? That evening, after the monk had departed, Harish sat in his prayer room surrounded by the instruments of his morning ritual, the flowers, the incense, the carefully arranged offerings. For the first time, he looked at them not with pride, but with questions. Tomorrow would bring another elaborate morning of prayer. He would recite the same mantras, perform the same rituals, make the same requests to the gods. But now he wondered, what was he actually asking for? And if he received it, would he recognize it? In the kitchen, he could hear Leela preparing his evening meal. In the courtyard, Gopal was sweeping the day's dust. Somewhere in the house, young Ravi was probably trying to stay out of sight, fearful of making another mistake. 3 people whose lives were shaped daily by his words and actions. 3 people who experienced his character not through his prayers, but through his behavior toward them. For the first time, Harish began to wonder which version of himself the gods knew better, the one who prayed beautifully about compassion each morning, or the one who lived the rest of each day. Let us pause here and rest. Take a gentle breath and feel how your body settles naturally into stillness. Notice how these stories touch something in your own experience, some recognition of the ways we sometimes work against our own deepest intentions. There is nothing to figure out, nothing to fix. Simply let these teachings find their way into your heart like rain soaking into earth. We will continue our journey in a moment, exploring more stories about the hidden costs of our choices and the wisdom that can guide us toward greater harmony. Let us explore another story about the unexpected consequences of our well-intended actions. In a mountain village where the air was thin and clear, and where each family knew the struggles of every other, there lived a prosperous merchant named Bhanu. He had worked hard all his life, starting with nothing and building a successful business trading goods between the mountain villages and the cities below. Bhanu had one daughter, Priya, who was the joy of his heart. She was intelligent, kind, and beautiful, with a laugh that could brighten the darkest winter day. As she grew from child to young woman, Bhanu became increasingly determined that she should never know the hardships he had endured in his youth. "My daughter will have everything I could not," he would tell his wife, Meera. "She will never go hungry as I did. She will never wear patched clothes or walk in shoes with holes. She will never know what it means to want something and be unable to have it." And so Bhanu began to shower Priya with gifts and privileges that were unusual in their simple mountain community. While other children helped their families with daily work, carrying water, tending animals, preparing food, Priya was told such tasks were beneath her station. "You are meant for finer things," Bhanu would say, when Meera suggested that Priya should learn to cook or weave like other girls her age. "Let the servants handle such work. My daughter's hands are too precious for rough labor." When Priya wanted new clothes, Bhanu would bring them from the finest shops in the distant city. When she desired sweets or delicacies not available in their village, he would send traders specifically to acquire them. When she complained that their mountain home was too small and plain, he began construction of a grand house unlike any other in the village. Meera watched this lavish treatment of their daughter with growing concern. "Husband," she would say gently, "perhaps Priya should learn some practical skills. What if someday she needs to manage a household of her own?" "Nonsense," Bhanu would reply. "I will arrange a marriage with a wealthy family. She will have servants to manage her household. My daughter will live like a queen. But what about the satisfaction of creating something with her own hands? What about the strength that comes from knowing she can care for herself? Bhanu would wave away such concerns. Strength comes from never needing to struggle. Satisfaction comes from having everything one desires. I am giving her the gift of an easy life. As the years passed, Priya grew accustomed to this treatment. She expected the finest things as her natural right. She became impatient when her wishes were not immediately fulfilled. She developed a disdain for the simple work that occupied other women in the village. "Why should I learn to cook?" she would say when other young women gathered to share recipes and techniques. "That is what servants are for." "Why should I tend a garden?" she would ask when neighbors spoke of their pride in growing their own vegetables. "My father can buy anything we need from the market." "Why should I mend clothes?" she would wonder when other girls worked together on their sewing. "If something is damaged, I simply get a new one." The other young women in the village began to find Priya's company less and less enjoyable. Her constant talk of expensive possessions and her dismissal of their simple pleasures created a distance between them and her. But Priya did not notice this growing isolation. She was too busy enjoying the comfort and luxury her father provided, too accustomed to being the center of attention in her own household. When Priya reached the age of 18, Bhanu began to look for a suitable husband for her. He had his eyes set on the son of a wealthy merchant family from the capital city, a young man named Kiran, who had been educated in the finest schools and who would inherit a substantial business. Negotiations for the marriage proceeded smoothly at first. Kiran's family was impressed by Bhanu's wealth and by his willingness to provide a generous dowry. They agreed to the match and began planning for an elaborate wedding. But as part of the traditional process, Kiran came to visit Priya's family for a week, to get to know his intended bride and to see how she conducted herself in daily life. The visit did not go as Bhanu had hoped. On the first morning, Kiran's mother accompanied him to observe Priya's domestic skills, a customary part of evaluating a potential daughter-in-law. They expected to see her prepare a meal, demonstrating her knowledge of cooking and household management. But when they arrived in the kitchen, they found Priya sitting idle while servants prepared breakfast. "Does Priya not cook?" Kiran's mother asked politely. "Oh, my daughter is too refined for such work," Bhanu replied proudly. "She has been raised to appreciate finer pursuits." Kiran's mother smiled, but her eyes held questions. In wealthy families, it was still considered important for women to understand household management, even if they had servants to do the actual work. Later that day, when the women of the village gathered for a traditional weaving circle, a social activity where they would work together on textiles while sharing news and stories, Priya was invited to join them. But when they handed her a spindle, it became clear that she had no idea how to use it. When they tried to teach her basic stitches, her fingers fumbled clumsily with the thread. When they spoke of their pride in creating beautiful things with their own hands, she looked bored and restless. "Perhaps we could do something else?" Priya suggested. "Something less tedious?" The other women exchanged glances. Kiran's mother, who had been watching carefully, said nothing, but her expression grew thoughtful. Over the following days, more concerns arose. When a neighbor's child fell and scraped his knee, the other young women knew immediately how to clean the wound and comfort the boy. Priya stood helplessly aside, having never learned such basic caregiving skills. When sudden rain threatened to ruin grain that had been spread to dry in the courtyard, everyone rushed to help gather it quickly. Everyone except Priya, who complained that such work would dirty her expensive clothes. When Kiran tried to engage her in conversation about books or ideas, he found that her education had been limited to superficial accomplishments. She could play a few simple songs on the veena, and she knew some poetry by heart, but she had never been encouraged to think deeply about anything. "What brings you joy?" Kiran asked her one evening as they sat in her father's garden. Priya thought for a moment. "Beautiful things," she said. "Fine clothes, good food, comfortable surroundings." "And what do you hope to create in your life? What would you like to accomplish?" Priya looked puzzled. "Create? I don't understand. My father takes care of everything. I suppose you will too after we marry." Kiran was quiet for a long time. That night, he spoke privately with his parents. "She is not cruel or ill-intentioned," he told them. "But she has been so sheltered, so provided for, that she has never developed any strength or skills of her own. She expects everything to be done for her, and she has no understanding of how to contribute to a household or a community." His mother nodded sadly. "I have observed this. She is like a beautiful flower that has been kept in a greenhouse, lovely to look at, but unable to survive in the real world." "What troubles me most," Kiran continued, "is that she seems to have no sense of purpose beyond receiving comfort and pleasure. She has never been allowed to struggle, so she has never learned perseverance. She has never been denied anything, so she has no appreciation for what she receives. She has never been required to give, so she knows only how to take." Kiran's father, who had built his own wealth through years of careful work and wise decisions, understood the problem immediately. "A partner in life must be able to stand beside you through difficulties," he said. "Someone who has never faced challenges cannot be depended upon when challenges arise." The next morning, Kiran's family politely withdrew their offer of marriage. Bhanu was stunned. "But why?" he demanded. "What more could they want? Priya is beautiful, well-dressed, refined. I have offered a generous dowry." Kiran's father spoke carefully, not wanting to give offense. "Your daughter is indeed lovely and refined, but we seek a daughter-in-law who can be a true partner to our son, someone who understands responsibility, who can contribute to the welfare of the family, who has the strength that comes from facing life's challenges. She has been protected from all hardship," he continued. "While this shows your love for her, it has left her unprepared for the realities of married life, especially in a family where both husband and wife must sometimes work together to solve problems and overcome difficulties." After Kiran's family departed, Bhanu sat in his half-built mansion, trying to understand what had gone wrong. He had given Priya everything he thought would make her happy and desirable. He had spared her every difficulty that had shaped his own character. He had surrounded her with luxury and comfort. But somehow, all his gifts had created something he had never intended. A daughter who was beautiful but helpless, pleasant but purposeless, refined but unable to truly engage with life. Mira found him there as evening fell. "I don't understand," he said to his wife. "I gave her everything. How could they reject her?" Mira sat beside her husband, choosing her words carefully. "You gave her many things," she said, "but perhaps without meaning to, you also took some things away." "What do you mean?" "You took away her chance to learn skills, to face small challenges, to discover her own strength. You took away her opportunities to help others, to contribute, to find purpose in work well done. You took away her experience of wanting something and working to achieve it, of failing at something and trying again." Bhanu stared at his wife. "But those things involve suffering. I wanted to spare her suffering." "Yes," Mira nodded. But in trying to spare her all suffering, you also spared her all growth. The small struggles that seem painful to a child are what teach strength to the adult. The simple work that seems beneath notice is what creates competence and confidence. The experience of wanting and waiting and working for something is what creates appreciation. She gestured toward the village around them, where other families were ending their day, women who took pride in meals they had cooked themselves, men who felt satisfaction in work completed, children who were learning skills that would serve them throughout their lives. Look at our neighbors, Mira continued. Their daughters know how to create beautiful and useful things with their own hands. They understand how to care for others when illness or trouble arises. They have faced small disappointments and learned to persevere. They have been given responsibilities and learned to fulfill them. But they have so much less than Priya, Panu protested. Do they? Mira asked. They have skills that cannot be taken away from them. They have strength that has been tested and proven. They have the confidence that comes from knowing they can handle whatever life brings. They have the satisfaction of contributing to their families and communities. What does Priya have that will remain hers if circumstances change? What can she do if fine clothes are not available? If servants cannot be hired? If someone depends on her for care or support? The questions hung in the air like mountain mist, slowly settling into Bhanu's understanding. That night, he walked through his grand house, the house he had built to show the world how well he could provide for his daughter. In room after room, he saw evidence of his generosity. Expensive furniture that Priya had quickly tired of, elaborate decorations that she barely noticed, costly clothing she wore once and forgot. But nowhere did he see evidence of anything she had created, any problem she had solved, any person she had helped, any skill she had mastered through effort and practice. He had worked so hard to give her everything that he had forgotten to help her become someone capable of creating value in the world. In his effort to spare her all difficulties, he had deprived her of the very experiences that build character and competence. His love had been genuine, his intentions pure, but the results were the opposite of what he had hoped to achieve. Take a gentle breath now and let your body settle more deeply into rest. Feel how these stories mirror something in your own experience, the ways we sometimes try to help but create harm, the ways our best intentions can lead to unexpected consequences. There is no judgment here, only the gentle recognition of how complex and interconnected our choices truly are. Let us explore one more story before we rest with these teachings. In a city known for its skilled craftsmen and beautiful workshops, there lived a master carpenter named Gautam. His furniture was sought after by wealthy families throughout the region, and his workshop employed a dozen apprentices who came from villages far and wide to learn his techniques. Gautam took great pride in his work and in his reputation. Every piece that left his workshop was examined with meticulous care. Every joint was perfect, every surface smooth as silk, every carving executed with precision that other craftsmen envied. But Gautam had developed a habit that, while born from his dedication to quality, slowly began to undermine the very excellence he sought to maintain. He had become unable to delegate the final finishing work to anyone else. "No one else understands quality the way I do," he would tell his wife Kamala when she suggested that his senior apprentices were skilled enough to handle some of the final detailing work. "If my name is going on a piece, then my hands must complete it." This had started reasonably enough. In his early years as a master, Gautam had occasionally been disappointed by apprentices who rushed through finishing work or who failed to meet his exacting standards. Better, he had decided, to do the final work himself and ensure perfection. But over the years, this practice had expanded. What had once been just the final polishing and inspection gradually became more and more of the work. Gautam found himself redoing joints that apprentices had cut adequately, recarving details that were good but not quite to his standard, resanding surfaces that were smooth but not perfectly smooth. "Master?" his senior apprentice Vikram would say when he saw Gautam taking apart a cabinet that Vikram had just completed. "Was there something wrong with my work?" "Not wrong exactly," Gautam would reply, already beginning to recut the joints. "But not quite right either. The fit should be tighter here. The grain should align better there. It's easier for me to redo it than to explain all the adjustments needed." Vikram would watch, feeling both grateful to learn from observing the master's corrections and frustrated that his own work was apparently never quite good enough to stand as it was. This pattern repeated with all the apprentices. They would complete work to the best of their ability, only to find Gautam redoing large portions of it. The stated reason was always the pursuit of perfection, but the effect was that none of the apprentices ever had the experience of completing a piece entirely on their own. As months passed, Gautam found himself working longer and longer hours. He would arrive at the workshop before dawn and stay until well after dark, personally finishing every piece, checking every detail, correcting every small imperfection. "You're exhausting yourself," Kamala would say when he came home each night, his clothes covered in sawdust, his hands cramped from hours of detailed work. "The reputation of the workshop depends on quality," Gautam would reply. "I cannot let standards slip." But something was beginning to slip, though Gautam did not see it clearly at first. Because he was spending all his time on finishing existing pieces, he had less and less time for the creative work of designing new items, for teaching apprentices properly, for developing innovative techniques that had once set his workshop apart from others. The apprentices, meanwhile, were becoming frustrated and restless. They had come to learn mastery of their craft, but they found themselves doing only preliminary work, rough cutting, basic assembly, while Gautam redid all the skilled finishing. They were learning to start work, but never to complete it to a master's standard. One by one, the more talented apprentices began to leave. They would find other workshops where they would be allowed to develop their skills fully, where their work would be trusted and refined, rather than simply redone. They lack patience, Gautam told himself when yet another apprentice departed. They want responsibility before they've earned it. But Vikram, who had been with him longest, understood the real problem. "Master," he said one evening as Gautam once again took apart a table that Vikram had assembled, "may I ask you something?" Gautam nodded absently, focused on adjusting the fit of a joint. "When you were learning your craft, did your master redo all your work?" Gautam paused in his cutting. It was a question he had never considered. He thought back to his own apprenticeship, decades earlier, under old Master Rajesh. "No," he said slowly. "Master Rajesh would show me what was wrong, guide me in correcting it myself, and then let me complete the piece. Even when my early work was quite rough, he would allow me to finish it and learn from the result." "And how did that feel?" Vikram asked gently. Gautam set down his tools, memory washing over him. He remembered the pride he had felt when Master Rajesh first allowed him to complete an entire chair by himself. It had not been perfect. The joints were a bit loose, the carving somewhat crude, but it was his. He had felt the deep satisfaction of taking raw wood and transforming it into something useful and beautiful with his own hands. It felt... Gautam paused, searching for words. It felt like becoming a craftsman rather than just watching one. Vikram nodded. "Master, I have been here for 3 years. I can cut joints that fit well, carve details that are clean and precise, sand surfaces that are smooth. But I have never been allowed to finish a complete piece. I have never felt what you felt when Master Rajesh first trusted you with that responsibility." The words struck Gautam like a physical blow. He looked at Vikram, really looked at him, and saw not the incompetent apprentice of his assumptions, but a skilled young craftsman who was being prevented from reaching his potential. "But your work is not yet perfect," Gautam said, though with less conviction than usual. "No," Vikram agreed. "It is not perfect. But Master, was your work perfect when Master Rajesh first let you finish a piece?" Again, Gautam thought back. "No, it took years to develop true mastery." "And how did you develop that mastery? By watching Master Rajesh redo your work, or by being allowed to complete pieces yourself, learning from your mistakes, feeling the pride of accomplishment that motivated you to improve?" Gautam sat heavily on his work stool. For the first time in years, he was seeing his workshop through different eyes. He saw apprentices who were skilled enough to do good work, but who were never allowed the satisfaction of completing it. He saw his own exhaustion from trying to personally finish every piece. He saw the creative projects he had abandoned because he had no time for anything but correcting other people's work. Most troubling of all, he saw that his workshop, once known for innovation and for training the finest craftsmen in the region, had become a place where only one person was allowed to achieve excellence while everyone else remained perpetually unfinished. "I thought I was maintaining quality," he said quietly. "You were," Vikram replied. "But perhaps there are different kinds of quality. There is the quality of perfect joints and flawless finishes, and there is the quality of craftsmanship that grows when people are trusted to complete their work, to learn from their results, to take pride in their accomplishments. What you call perfection may actually prevent the development of true excellence in others." That night, Gautam walked through his workshop in the lamplight, looking at the half-finished pieces that awaited his attention. Tables and chairs and cabinets that apprentices had begun but would not be allowed to complete. Work that was good enough to function, beautiful enough to please customers, but not perfect enough to meet his standards. He thought of Master Rajesh, who had died several years earlier. The old man had produced beautiful work, but more importantly, he had produced craftsmen. Former apprentices of Master Rajesh now ran successful workshops throughout the region, creating their own beautiful pieces, training their own apprentices. How many future masters had left Gautam's workshop because they were never allowed to experience the completion of their work? How many potential innovations had been lost because he spent all his time perfecting existing pieces rather than exploring new possibilities? His pursuit of perfection had become, paradoxically, an obstacle to excellence, both his own and that of others. The next morning, when Vikram arrived at the workshop, he found Gautam standing beside the table that had been partially disassembled the night before. "Vikram," Gautam said, "please finish this table. Use your best judgment on the joints and the final sanding. When you believe it is complete, call me to see it." Vikram looked surprised, then pleased. "Are you certain, Master?" "I am certain that you will never become a true craftsman if you are not allowed to craft," Gautam replied. "And I am certain that I will never become a true teacher if I only demonstrate rather than trust." As Vikram began work on the table, Gautam felt something he had not experienced in years: the freedom to move on to other tasks. He could design the new cabinet he had been planning for months. He could properly instruct the junior apprentices in techniques they needed to learn. He could be a master craftsman rather than merely a corrector of other people's work. It would require trust, and trust always carries risk. The table Vikram completed might not be as perfect as one Gautam would have made himself, but it would be good, and it would be finished, and Vikram would experience the satisfaction and learning that comes only from carrying work through to completion. And perhaps, in allowing others to achieve their own form of excellence, Gautam would rediscover his own. Rest here and breathe gently. Let these stories settle into your awareness, like seeds finding their place in fertile ground. Notice how each tale reveals something about the unintended consequences of our choices. The way our efforts to create one outcome can sometimes produce exactly the opposite result. There is wisdom in this recognition, not to discourage us from acting, but to help us act with greater awareness, greater humility, greater attention to the full effects of our choices. The stories continue, each one a facet of the same eternal truth about cause and effect, intention and result, the complex dance of karma that shapes all our lives. We have journeyed through these stories together, watching how our best intentions can sometimes create the very problems we meant to solve. We have seen the salt merchant whose careful checking consumed her cargo, the father whose favoritism damaged both his sons, the Brahmin whose perfect prayers were contradicted by his cruel actions, the merchant whose protection left his daughter helpless, and the craftsman whose pursuit of perfection prevented others from achieving excellence. All of these stories point to the same truth that the Buddha taught, that our actions have consequences that ripple outward in ways we often cannot see, that karma is not punishment from above, but the natural result of cause and effect working through every choice we make. In your own life, you may find echoes of these stories. Perhaps you recognize the tendency to check and worry until the checking becomes more harmful than helpful. Perhaps you see how trying to spare someone all difficulty can rob them of the strength that comes from facing challenges. Perhaps you notice how good intentions without awareness can create suffering even when we meant to create joy. The deepest truth is that wisdom lies not in avoiding action, but in acting with greater awareness of the full consequences of our choices. When we understand that every action creates results, not just the results we intend, but often others we never considered, we can choose more skillfully, more compassionately, more in harmony with the way things actually are. Let your body settle now into complete rest. Feel your shoulders releasing any tension they may have held, your jaw softening, your breath moving naturally without any effort from you. You don't need to remember these stories perfectly or understand them completely. They will work in you, like seeds in dark soil, sprouting their wisdom when the time is right. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go, no one you need to become in this moment. You can simply rest here, held by the same forces that hold the mountains and rivers, the same peace that exists beneath all the activity of daily life. Everything is complete as it is. You are already home. Simply be here and let sleep come as gently as dusk settling over quiet water. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us at Sleepy Monk. In a valley where 3 rivers met and fertile fields stretched toward distant hills, there lived a farmer named Mohan, who was known throughout the region for his exceptional generosity. His land was prosperous, his harvests abundant, and his heart was open to anyone who came to him in need. When neighbors faced poor harvests, Mohan would share his grain freely. When traveling merchants needed shelter for the night, his door was always open. When the village temple required funds for repairs, Mohan's contribution was always the largest. His reputation for kindness spread far beyond his own village, and people would sometimes journey for days just to ask for his help. "God has blessed me with abundance," Mohan would tell his wife Sita whenever she gently suggested that perhaps his generosity was becoming excessive. "How can I keep these blessings for myself when others are suffering?" Sita admired her husband's compassionate heart, but she had begun to notice troubling patterns in how people responded to his constant giving. There was Raman, a farmer from the next village, who had first come to Mohan 3 years earlier after a bad harvest destroyed most of his crop. Mohan had given him enough grain to feed his family through the winter. But instead of returning the following year to repay the kindness, or even to report how he was managing, Raman had come back asking for help with seeds for planting. "My soil is poor this year," he had explained. "Just a small loan of seeds, and I will repay you after harvest." Mohan had gladly provided the seeds. But when harvest time came, Raman did not return. Instead, he sent word through another farmer that his crop had been smaller than expected, and he would need another year to repay his debts. Now, in the 3rd year, Raman had appeared again. This time, he needed help with purchasing a new bullock, as his old one had died. "You know I am good for it," he told Mohan. "I just need time to get back on my feet." Mohan, true to his nature, provided the money for the bullock. But Sita noticed something that her husband seemed to miss. Raman no longer spoke of his need with the desperation and gratitude he had shown in that first year. Instead, he seemed to expect Mohan's help as something owed to him. There was also the case of young Krishna, a boy from their own village whose parents had died when he was 15. Mohan had taken responsibility for the boy's education, paying for his schooling in the distant town and providing him with money for food and lodging. "Every child deserves a chance to learn," Mohan had said when he began supporting Krishna. "Education will give him opportunities his parents never had." For 2 years, Mohan had sent money regularly, never asking for reports on Krishna's progress or requiring any proof of how the money was being used. His trust was complete, his support unconditional. But when Krishna finally returned to the village, Sita was disturbed by what she observed. The young man seemed to have learned very little during his time away. His writing was still poor, his knowledge of useful skills minimal. When she asked him about his studies, his answers were vague and evasive. More troubling was his attitude. Rather than showing gratitude for the education Mohan had provided, Krishna seemed to feel that more help was owed to him. "I need money to start a small business," he told Mohan within days of his return. "Since you invested in my education, surely you will want to invest in my future success." The word "invested" struck Sita strangely. It suggested that Mohan's generosity had been not a gift, but the beginning of an obligation. Most concerning of all was what had happened with Mohan's own brother, Suresh. Suresh had always been the less successful of the two brothers, less disciplined, less careful with money, more inclined to take easy paths that led to difficult consequences. When his small farm began to fail 5 years earlier, Mohan had stepped in immediately to help. First, he had paid off Suresh's debts to local moneylenders. Then he had provided funds to improve the irrigation on Suresh's land. When that proved insufficient, he had given Suresh a portion of his own land to cultivate. When Suresh struggled even with the better land, Mohan began providing him with a regular monthly allowance to ensure his family had enough to eat. What had started as temporary help during a difficult period had gradually become permanent support. Suresh no longer made any serious effort to improve his farming or find alternative sources of income. Instead, he had come to depend entirely on his brother's generosity. "Why should I strain myself with difficult work?" Sita had overheard him telling his wife. When Mohan is happy to provide for us, he has more than he needs, and we are family." The transformation in Suresh's character troubled Sita deeply. Once, he had been proud and hardworking, if not always successful. Now he seemed to have lost all sense of personal responsibility. He would come to their house not as a brother seeking temporary help, but as someone collecting what he considered his due. When Sita tried to discuss these observations with Mohan, he would always find ways to excuse or explain away the behavior she described. "Raman has had some bad luck," he would say. "When his situation improves, I'm sure he will remember our friendship." "Krishna is young," he would explain. "Young people sometimes seem ungrateful when they are still finding their way in life." "Suresh is my brother," he would remind her. "Family helps family. That is our duty." But Sita could see what Mohan's kind heart prevented him from recognizing, that his unconditional generosity was gradually changing the people he helped. Instead of inspiring them to greater effort and eventual self-reliance, it was teaching them to expect help without effort, to take without giving, to view his kindness not as a gift to be treasured, but as a resource to be exploited. The crisis came during the festival season, when many people traditionally visit family and friends to exchange gifts and share in celebrations. That week, Mohan's house was constantly full of visitors, but Sita noticed that almost all of them had come not to celebrate with their friend, but to ask for something. Raman arrived with a story about needing funds to repair his roof. Krishna appeared with a plan for a business that required Mohan's investment. 3 other farmers from neighboring villages came with various tales of difficulty and need. Even distant relatives, people who had barely acknowledged Mohan's existence in previous years, suddenly appeared with problems that required his financial assistance. Most painfully, Suresh came not just for his usual monthly support, but with demands for additional money to pay for festival clothes for his children and special food for the celebrations. "Surely during festival time, we should not have to stint," he told Mohan. "What would people think if your own brother's children were poorly dressed during the celebrations?" Sita watched her husband during that week, seeing the exhaustion that crept into his eyes as visitor after visitor arrived with outstretched hands. She saw how his natural joy in giving was being slowly replaced by a weary sense of obligation. The spontaneous generosity that had once brought him such pleasure was becoming an endless series of demands that he felt unable to refuse. On the final day of the festival, after the last visitor had departed with pockets full of Mohan's money, Sita found her husband sitting alone in their courtyard, staring at their nearly empty money box. "Husband," she said gently, "may I ask you something?" He nodded, though he did not look up. "Do you remember how you felt when you first began helping Raman? Or when you decided to pay for Krishna's education? Or when you started supporting your brother?" Mohan thought back to those early moments of decision. He remembered the warmth that had filled his chest when he imagined Raman's relief at receiving grain for his hungry family. He recalled the satisfaction he had felt in offering Krishna a chance at education and a better life. He could still feel the love that had motivated his support of Suresh during a time of genuine need. "I felt joyful," he said. "I felt grateful that I was able to help. I felt closer to God through the act of giving. And how do you feel now when these same people come to you?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the festival fires. Mohan continued staring at the money box, confronting feelings he had tried to avoid acknowledging. He struggled for words. "I feel tired, obligated. Sometimes I feel trapped." The admission surprised him with its honesty. "Why do you think that has changed?" Sita asked. Mohan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with confusion. I don't know. I am doing the same thing, giving to those who need help. The actions are the same, but somehow the feeling is completely different. Sita sat beside her husband, choosing her words carefully. Perhaps, she said, the actions are not quite the same. In the beginning, you gave to people who were grateful, who used your gifts wisely, who intended to become self-sufficient again. Your giving was helping them through temporary difficulties toward renewed independence. She gestured toward the gate where so many visitors had come and gone that week. But now, you are giving to people who have learned to expect your help, who make no effort to change their situations, who see your generosity not as a gift, but as a right. Your giving is no longer helping them toward independence. It is enabling them to remain dependent. Mohan looked at his wife with surprise. He had never thought of the distinction she was drawing. But giving is giving, he said. Surely the motivation is what matters, not the result. Is it? Sita asked gently. If your intention is to help people, but the actual result is to make them more helpless and dependent, then what have you really accomplished? The question struck him like a physical blow. He thought of Raman, who seemed less capable of managing his own farm now than he had been 3 years earlier. He thought of Krishna, who had somehow become more entitled and less self-reliant through the education Mohan had provided. He thought of Suresh, who had lost all motivation to improve his own situation once he knew his brother would provide for him indefinitely. Are you saying I should stop helping people? Mohan asked, and there was pain in his voice. Giving had been such a central part of his identity, his spiritual practice, his way of expressing gratitude for his own blessings. No, Sita replied. I am saying that perhaps true help looks different from what you have been doing. Perhaps real generosity requires more wisdom than just an open heart and an open purse. That night, Mohan lay awake thinking about his wife's words. He remembered a story his grandfather had told him many years earlier about a man who found a butterfly struggling to emerge from its chrysalis. Wanting to help the creature, the man had carefully cut open the chrysalis to free the butterfly. But the butterfly that emerged was weak and malformed, unable to fly, and it died within hours. The struggle to break free from the chrysalis is what strengthens the butterfly's wings, his grandfather had explained. By trying to spare it that struggle, the kind man actually doomed it. For the first time, Mohan began to wonder if his generosity might be like cutting open chrysalises, an act that felt kind, but actually prevented the growth and strength that come from facing necessary struggles. The next morning, he decided to do something he had never done before. He would visit the people he had been helping, not to give them money, but to truly see how his help had affected their lives. His first stop was Raman's farm. What he found there shocked him. The fields that Raman claimed were too poor to grow good crops were clearly fertile. Mohan could see this from the healthy growth of weeds and wild plants. The tools that Raman said he could not afford to maintain were scattered carelessly around the property, rusted from neglect rather than worn from use. Most telling of all, Mohan discovered that Raman had built a substantial addition to his house, an addition that would have cost more than all the loans he had received from Mohan over the past 3 years. When Mohan asked about the addition, Raman's explanation was vague and defensive. It became clear that rather than using Mohan's help to improve his farming, Raman had been using it to avoid farming while pursuing other, more enjoyable activities. Mohan's second stop was to inquire about Krishna's time in school. What he learned from the teachers there was deeply disturbing. Krishna had attended classes irregularly and showed little interest in learning when he was present. The money Mohan had sent for food and lodging had apparently been spent on entertainment and luxury items. Krishna had failed most of his examinations and had learned very little during his 2 years away. "We tried to encourage him," one teacher told Mohan, but he seemed to believe that simply being there was sufficient, that effort was not required of him. He often spoke of having a generous sponsor who would take care of his future, regardless of his academic performance. The final revelation came when Mohan looked carefully at his own financial records. The constant giving of the past few years had not only depleted his savings, but had also prevented him from making improvements to his own farm that would have increased his harvests and better secured his family's future. In trying to help everyone else, he had inadvertently jeopardized his own ability to continue being helpful. That evening, Sita found Mohan sitting in their courtyard again. But this time, his expression was different. Instead of confused exhaustion, she saw the clarity that comes from finally understanding a difficult truth. "I have been giving people fish," he said, "when I should have been teaching them to fish." "More than that," Sita replied gently. "You have been giving them fish so regularly that they forgot they ever knew how to fish themselves." Mohan nodded slowly. "And now they are weaker than when I started helping them. And I am weaker too, because I have given away not just my surplus, but the foundation of my ability to continue giving." He looked at his wife with new understanding. True generosity is not giving people whatever they ask for. It is giving them what they need to become capable of providing for themselves. "Sometimes," Sita added, "the most generous thing we can do is to allow people to struggle with their own challenges, to find their own solutions, to build their own strength, even when watching that struggle is painful for us." As the stars appeared in the clear sky above their valley, Mohan began to see his path forward. It would require a different kind of courage than he had shown before. Not the courage to give, but the courage to stop giving in ways that created dependence. Not the courage to say yes, but the courage to say no when saying yes would ultimately harm both the giver and the receiver. True compassion, he was beginning to understand, sometimes required the wisdom to let people face the very difficulties that would help them grow stronger. Take a moment here to rest and breathe gently. Feel how the weight of these stories settles into your understanding, not as burdens, but as gifts of wisdom. Notice how the truth revealed in each tale connects to your own experience of giving and receiving, of helping and being helped. Let these insights find their natural place in your heart, like rivers finding their way to the sea. Let us explore another story about the delicate balance between intention and effect in a monastery nestled between two mountains, where the morning mist would drift through stone archways and prayer flags fluttered in the mountain breeze. There lived a young monk named Tenzin. He was deeply sincere in his practice, spending long hours in meditation, studying sacred texts with devotion, and following all the rules of monastic life with careful precision. Tenzin had come to the monastery 5 years earlier with a burning desire to achieve enlightenment. Unlike some of the other monks who seemed content with their daily routines of prayer, work, and study, Tenzin was impatient for spiritual progress. He wanted to advance quickly along the path, to experience the profound realizations that the great masters had described in the ancient texts. To this end, Tenzin had developed an intensive spiritual practice that went far beyond what was required. While other monks meditated for the prescribed 2 hours each morning and evening, Tenzin would sit for 4 or 5 hours. While others studied for an hour after lunch, Tenzin would spend 3 hours poring over the most challenging philosophical texts. While others took the weekly rest day to relax and socialize with fellow monks, Tenzin would use that time for additional spiritual practices. The path to enlightenment requires total dedication, he would tell himself during the long hours of extra practice. Those who are casual in their efforts will make casual progress. But those who sacrifice everything for spiritual advancement will achieve the highest realizations. The abbot of the monastery, an elderly master named Lobsang, watched Tenzin's intense efforts with quiet concern. He had seen many young monks arrive with similar urgency, similar determination to rush toward enlightenment through sheer force of effort. But when Lobsang tried to gently suggest that Tenzin might benefit from a more balanced approach, some time for rest, for friendship with other monks, for the simple enjoyment of life in their beautiful mountain setting, Tenzin would politely but firmly decline. "Thank you, Rinpoche," he would say, using the respectful title for his teacher, "but I cannot afford to waste time on non-essential activities. Every moment spent in casual conversation or idle enjoyment is a moment stolen from the path to liberation." Tenzin's fellow monks initially admired his dedication. Some even felt somewhat guilty about their own more moderate approach to practice when they saw Tenzin's extraordinary efforts. But as months passed, they began to notice troubling changes in their intense colleague. The long hours of forced meditation, rather than bringing Tenzin greater peace and clarity, seemed to be making him more tense and agitated. He would emerge from his extended sitting sessions looking strained and exhausted rather than refreshed and centered. His intensive study, instead of deepening his understanding, seemed to be filling his mind with concepts and theories that he would recite mechanically but could not apply practically to daily situations. He could quote lengthy passages from advanced philosophical texts, but he would become impatient and irritable when asked to perform simple tasks around the monastery. Most concerning of all, Tenzin's relationships with his fellow monks were deteriorating. His single-minded focus on spiritual advancement left no room for the patience, kindness, and compassion that were supposed to be the fruits of spiritual practice. When a new monk arrived who needed help learning the daily routines, Tenzin would show him the procedures quickly and impatiently, then rush back to his own practice. When older monks wanted to share stories or wisdom from their experience, Tenzin would listen politely, but with obvious restlessness, eager to return to his more important activities. When the monastery's old cook became ill and extra help was needed in the kitchen, Tenzin would fulfill his assigned duties efficiently, but without warmth or care, treating the work as an unwelcome interruption to his spiritual progress rather than as an opportunity to practice service and compassion. The other monks began to avoid Tenzin's company, not out of dislike, but because being around him felt tense and uncomfortable. His urgency was infectious in an unpleasant way, making others feel that they too should be anxious about their spiritual progress rather than finding joy and peace in their practice. One morning, after a particularly long night of meditation during which Tenzin had barely slept, he arrived late to the morning assembly where Abbot Lobsang was giving a teaching about patience and gentleness on the spiritual path. Tenzin slipped into the back of the hall, trying not to disturb the teaching, but his obvious exhaustion and agitation were noticeable to everyone present. After the formal teaching ended, Abbot Lobsang asked Tenzin to remain behind as the other monks filed out to begin their daily work. "My young friend," the abbot said when they were alone, "you look tired." "I am fine, Rinpoche," Tenzin replied, though his bloodshot eyes and pale complexion suggested otherwise. "I was practicing meditation through the night. Sleep is not important for someone seriously committed to awakening." Lobsang studied his student's face with the compassionate attention he had learned through decades of guiding young monks. Tell me, Tenzin, what have you discovered in all these extra hours of practice? Tenzin's face lit up with enthusiasm despite his exhaustion. Oh, many realizations, Rinpoche. I have understood the nature of emptiness, the interdependence of all phenomena, the illusory nature of the self. I have experienced states of profound stillness and clarity. That is wonderful, Lobsang replied. And how have these realizations changed the way you treat your fellow monks? The question caught Tenzin off guard. He had expected praise for his spiritual insights, not an inquiry about his relationships. I try to maintain focus on the essential practices, rather than getting distracted by social interactions, he said uncertainly. I see. And how have your experiences of profound stillness affected your patience when helping newcomers learn our routines? Again, Tenzin struggled to answer. The truth was that he had become more impatient, not less, as his practice intensified. When you experienced the interdependence of all phenomena, Lobsang continued gently, did this make you more willing to help with humble tasks like cooking and cleaning, recognizing these activities as connected to everyone's well-being? Tenzin's silence was answer enough. Lobsang rose from his seat and walked to the window that looked out over the monastery gardens, where several monks were working together to tend the vegetables that would feed the community. Tenzin, he said, let me tell you about 2 gardeners I once knew. The first gardener was very ambitious. He wanted to grow the most beautiful flowers in the shortest possible time. So he would plant his seeds and then water them constantly, not just once a day as recommended, but 5 or 6 times. He would add extra fertilizer, thinking more nutrients would mean faster growth. He would even dig up the seeds periodically to check on their progress. The second gardener planted his seeds according to traditional methods. He watered them once a day, added fertilizer moderately, and then waited patiently for growth to occur naturally. Which gardener do you think produced more beautiful flowers? Tenzin thought about the question. The first gardener was working harder and showing more dedication. Surely his extra efforts would produce better results. Lobsang shook his head. The first gardener's seeds rotted from too much water. Those that survived were weak and stunted from being constantly disturbed. His impatience and excessive efforts actually prevented the growth he was trying to force. The second gardener's seeds grew strong and healthy, producing flowers of natural beauty that brought joy to everyone who saw them. He turned from the window to face Tenzin directly. Spiritual development, like the growth of flowers, has its own natural timing. It requires consistent, moderate effort combined with patience and trust in the process. Trying to force rapid progress through excessive practice often produces the opposite of what we seek. Tenzin felt a strange discomfort hearing these words. Everything in him wanted to argue that more effort must surely produce better results, that dedication and sacrifice were essential for serious spiritual advancement. But Rinpoche, he said, surely the great masters of the past achieved realization through intense practice and complete dedication. How can I be content with ordinary effort when the goal is so important? Lobsang smiled with the infinite patience that comes from understanding gained through experience. Tell me, Tenzin, what is the goal of our spiritual practice? To achieve enlightenment, Tenzin answered immediately. To realize our true nature, to be free from suffering, to help all beings find liberation. And how will we know when we are moving toward this goal? Tenzin recited from memory. By developing compassion, wisdom, patience, generosity, ethical conduct, and meditation skills. Excellent. Lobsang nodded. Now, looking honestly at your life over the past year of intensive practice, do you see more compassion in yourself or less? More patience or less? More joy and peace or more anxiety and tension? The questions struck Tenzin like arrows finding their target. He had been so focused on accumulating meditation hours and intellectual understanding that he had never examined whether his practice was actually producing the qualities he claimed to be seeking. More anxiety, he admitted quietly. More impatience, less joy. Then perhaps, Lobsang said gently, your method, despite its sincere motivation, is taking you away from your goal rather than toward it. Tenzin sat in silence, feeling as if the ground beneath his spiritual certainty was shifting. Everything he had believed about the path suddenly seemed questionable. What should I do differently? He asked, and for the first time in months, his voice held genuine humility rather than determined self-assurance. Perhaps, Lobsang suggested, you could try practicing like the second gardener. Follow the traditional schedule of meditation and study. But between these formal practices, pay attention to the informal opportunities for spiritual development, the chances to show patience with a struggling newcomer, to bring joy to kitchen work, to listen deeply to an older monk's stories, to appreciate the beauty of our mountain home. True spiritual development happens not just in formal sitting meditation, but in every interaction, every task, every moment of daily life. The monk who is kind to his fellow practitioners while sitting for 2 hours is more advanced than the monk who sits for 5 hours but treats others with impatience and superiority. As Tenzin walked back to his small room, he felt a strange mixture of disappointment and relief. Disappointed because his strategy for rapid spiritual progress had been revealed as counterproductive. Relieved because the constant pressure he had been placing on himself could finally be released. That afternoon, instead of rushing to his private study session, he joined several monks who were repairing prayer flags that had been torn by recent winds. Instead of seeing this as time stolen from more important practices, he allowed himself to enjoy the simple pleasure of working together, of sharing conversation, of contributing to the beauty of their monastery home. To his surprise, he found this humble activity more genuinely peaceful than many of his forced meditation sessions had been. For the first time in months, Tenzin felt something he had almost forgotten, the natural joy that had originally drawn him to spiritual practice, before his ambition had transformed that joy into anxious striving. Perhaps, he began to understand, the path to enlightenment was not about pushing harder, but about learning to move in harmony with the natural rhythms of growth and development, like a river that reaches the ocean not by rushing frantically, but by following the landscape with patient persistence. Let your breath settle now into its natural rhythm, requiring no effort or control from you. Feel how rest comes naturally when we stop forcing, how peace emerges when we release our urgent grasping. These stories work in you like gentle rain on soil, not through pressure, but through patient absorption. Allow whatever wisdom they contain to find its own timing, its own natural way of taking root in your understanding. Let us explore one more story about the unexpected ways our actions can create the very outcomes we hope to avoid. In a bustling trading city where merchants from many lands came to buy and sell their goods, there lived a successful spice trader named Vikram. His shop was renowned for carrying the finest cardamom, the purest saffron, and the most fragrant cinnamon that could be found in the entire region. Vikram had worked for 20 years to build his reputation, and he was deeply proud of the trust that customers placed in him. When a cook from the royal palace needed spices for an important feast, she came to Vikram. When wedding planners required the best ingredients for celebration meals, they sought out his shop. When other merchants needed to buy spices for their own trade ventures, Vikram's store was their first choice. But success, Vikram had discovered, brought with it a constant worry that had begun to consume more and more of his thoughts. He lived in fear that competitors might try to damage his reputation by spreading false stories about the quality of his spices. This fear was not entirely unfounded. The spice trade was competitive, and Vikram had occasionally heard whispered rumors about other merchants, stories suggesting that their goods were not as pure as claimed, that their scales were not accurate, that their prices were inflated unfairly. In this business, Vikram would tell his assistant Gopal, reputation is everything. One false accusation, one malicious rumor, and years of honest work can be destroyed overnight. To protect against this possibility, Vikram had developed an elaborate system of what he called reputation management. Whenever he heard that customers were discussing spice quality or comparing different merchants, he would make sure to be part of those conversations, subtly steering them toward positive comments about his own shop. When he encountered other spice merchants at trade gatherings, Vikram would listen carefully to their conversations, alert for any hint that they might be planning to undermine his business. If he heard anything that concerned him, he would quietly share his worries with trusted customers, not as direct accusations but as gentle warnings to be careful about quality when shopping elsewhere. "I don't want to speak ill of anyone," he would say in a tone of reluctant concern, "but I heard that Sharma's last shipment of cardamom was not quite up to his usual standards. You might want to examine it carefully before purchasing." Or, "Ramesh seems to be having some difficulties with his suppliers lately. I noticed several customers returning items to his shop last week. Just something to be aware of if you're considering shopping there." Vikram told himself that these warnings were a service to his customers, protecting them from potentially inferior products. He was not trying to harm his competitors, he reasoned, merely ensuring that people were well informed about their choices. But as months passed, Vikram's protective strategies began to expand. He found himself listening more and more intently to marketplace gossip, seeking out conversations where his competitors might be discussed. He began visiting other spice shops, not to buy anything, but to observe their operations and look for flaws he could diplomatically mention to mutual customers. When Sharma received a particularly good shipment of black pepper that was attracting attention from buyers, Vikram made sure to mention to several regular customers that pepper quality could be very inconsistent, and that they should be especially careful to test any they purchased for freshness and purity. When Ramesh began offering slightly lower prices on certain items, Vikram would worry aloud to anyone who would listen about how dramatically reduced prices might indicate compromised quality, suggesting that truly premium spices could never be sold cheaply without some hidden cost. Gopal, who had worked for Vikram for 5 years and admired his employer's business skills, began to feel uncomfortable with these tactics. "Sir," he said one day after watching Vikram spend an hour questioning a customer about her experience shopping at a competitor's store, "perhaps we should focus more on promoting our own quality rather than raising questions about others." Vikram looked at his assistant with surprise. "I am protecting our customers from being deceived. There is nothing wrong with helping people make informed decisions." "But sir," Gopal continued carefully, "when you warn people about problems that might exist elsewhere, even if you are careful not to make direct accusations, the effect is the same as if you had spoken against the other merchants directly." Vikram dismissed this concern with a wave of his hand. "I never say anything that is not true, and I never make claims I cannot support. I am simply encouraging people to be cautious and discerning in their purchases." But Gopal had noticed something that Vikram seemed unable to see. The atmosphere in the spice market was gradually changing, and Vikram's own reputation was beginning to shift in ways he had not anticipated. The problem began with a merchant named Lal, who sold imported tea and occasionally competed with Vikram for customers seeking premium goods. Lal had started to hear the subtle warnings that Vikram was sharing about various competitors, and he began to recognize a pattern. "It's interesting," Lal mentioned to another trader during a quiet moment at the weekly market gathering, "how often Vikram seems to hear concerning things about other spice merchants. He's always very diplomatic about it, but there seems to be a problem with everyone except himself." This observation began to circulate among the merchant community. Other traders started paying attention to Vikram's conversational habits, noting how frequently he would introduce subtle doubts about his competitors while presenting himself as a reluctant bearer of unfortunate news. "Have you noticed," asked Indira, who sold cooking oils, "that whenever someone mentions planning to buy from another spice dealer, Vikram always has some gentle warning about quality issues or supply problems?" The merchants began to realize that Vikram was systematically undermining confidence in every other spice trader in the market, always with the appearance of helpful concern, but with the effect of driving business toward his own shop. This recognition created an unexpected backlash. Instead of appreciating Vikram's warnings as customer service, people began to see them as manipulative attempts to monopolize the spice trade through subtle sabotage of his competitors. Word of this perception began to spread among customers as well. Regular buyers started to notice that Vikram always had something negative to say about other merchants, and they began to question his motives. "Why?" wondered Kamala, a cook who had been buying spices from Vikram for years. "Does he always seem to know about problems with everyone else's goods? And why does he always share these concerns just when I'm considering shopping elsewhere?" The reputation that Vikram had worked so hard to protect began to suffer from his very efforts to defend it. Customers started to see him not as a trustworthy merchant looking out for their interests, but as someone who would say anything to prevent them from buying from his competitors. The crisis came during the Autumn Spice Festival, when all the major traders would display their finest goods for the season's most important customers. Vikram had prepared for weeks, ensuring that his selection was absolutely perfect, his prices competitive, his display more attractive than ever before. But as the festival began, he noticed that fewer customers than usual were visiting his stall. Those who did come seemed less enthusiastic, more distant in their interactions with him. Meanwhile, he observed that his competitors, the very merchants he had been subtly warning customers about for months, seemed to be doing excellent business. Sharma's cardamom stall was crowded with buyers. Ramesh was completing one sale after another. Even newer merchants were attracting more attention than Vikram's established business. By the second day of the festival, Vikram was becoming desperate. In his anxiety, he made a crucial mistake. When a wealthy customer approached his stall and began examining his saffron, Vikram decided to make a direct comparison that he hoped would secure the sale. "You know," he said, nodding towards Sharma's nearby stall, "I have been hearing some concerns about the purity of saffron being sold by other dealers this season. Some customers have complained that what they thought was pure saffron turned out to be mixed with less expensive threads to increase the weight." The customer, whose name was Deepak and who had been buying spices in this market for 15 years, looked at Vikram with an expression that was not what the merchant had expected. "Are you suggesting that Sharma is cheating his customers?" Deepak asked quietly. "Oh, no, Vikram backpedaled quickly. "I would never make such an accusation. I am simply saying that buyers should be very careful to examine any saffron thoroughly before purchasing." But Deepak was not satisfied with this diplomatic retreat. "Vikram," he said, "I have been shopping in this market for many years. I have bought spices from you, from Sharma, from Ramesh, and from many others. In all those years, Sharma has never sold me anything that was not exactly as he claimed it to be." He paused, studying Vikram's face carefully. "But in recent months, Every time I have mentioned shopping elsewhere, you have found some reason to warn me about potential problems with other merchants. You seem to be the only spice dealer in this entire market who never has supply issues, never receives questionable goods, never faces any of the challenges that somehow affect all your competitors. The words struck Vikram like physical blows. He tried to respond, to explain his intentions, but Deepak was not finished. What troubles me, the customer continued, is not that you promote your own goods. Every merchant should do that. What troubles me is that you promote your goods by casting doubt on everyone else's. A truly confident merchant would let his spices speak for themselves. Deepak set down the saffron he had been examining and walked away, heading directly to Sharma's stall. That evening, after the worst day of business Vikram had experienced in years, he sat in his shop trying to understand what had gone wrong. His spices were as good as ever, his prices fair, his service attentive. Yet customers were avoiding him in favor of competitors he had convinced himself were inferior. Gopal, who had watched the day's events with growing concern, finally spoke up. "Sir, may I ask you something?" Vikram nodded, though he looked too dejected to really listen. "When you began warning customers about other merchants, what was your goal?" "To protect my reputation," Vikram answered immediately. "To ensure that false rumors spread by competitors would not damage my business." "And has your reputation been protected?" The question hung in the air between them. Vikram's reputation had not been protected. It had been damaged, and damaged by his own efforts to defend it. "I don't understand," he said, though his voice suggested that perhaps he was beginning to understand all too well. Gopal spoke carefully, with the respect of a loyal employee who genuinely cared about his employer's welfare. "Sir, in trying to prevent competitors from spreading rumors about you, you began spreading subtle doubts about them. In trying to protect your reputation from attack, you began attacking theirs. The very behavior you feared they might engage in, undermining a competitor's standing, became your own behavior." The truth of this observation settled over Vikram like a heavy blanket. He had become exactly what he had been afraid his competitors might become. In defending against a threat that may never have existed, he had created the reality he feared most, a reputation for dishonest dealing and manipulative practices. "But I never lied," he protested weakly. "I never made direct accusations. I only suggested that people should be careful." "Perhaps," Gopal replied gently, "the issue is not whether your words were technically truthful, but whether your intentions were truly helpful. When we warn someone about a danger that may not exist, for the purpose of benefiting ourselves rather than protecting them, are we serving their interests or our own?" Vikram spent the night walking through the empty market, looking at the stalls of the merchants he had spent months undermining with his subtle campaigns of doubt. Sharma's spice display was neat and honest, his prices clearly marked, his reputation built on decades of straightforward dealing. Ramesh's shop showed evidence of steady customers who trusted his judgment and returned regularly for his products. These were not the scheming competitors that Vikram's fears had made them appear to be. They were honest merchants working hard to make a living, just as he was. His perception of them as threats to be defended against had been created by his own anxiety rather than by any actual hostile actions on their part. In trying to protect himself from imaginary attacks on his reputation, he had launched very real attacks on theirs. In the process, he had destroyed the very thing he had been trying to preserve, the trust and respect of his customers. The most painful realization was that his fears had been self-fulfilling. By acting as if his competitors were trying to damage his reputation, he had damaged his own reputation far more effectively than any rival could have done. His defensive actions had created the exact situation he had been trying to prevent. Rest here and feel your breath moving gently without any effort from you. Notice how these stories reveal the intricate web of cause and effect that flows through all our choices. Sometimes our very efforts to prevent a feared outcome become the cause of that outcome. Sometimes our attempts to protect what we value end up damaging it. There is profound wisdom in recognizing these patterns, not to discourage us from caring, but to help us care more skillfully, more aware of the full consequences of our actions. Let us explore our final story about the unexpected ways our choices can shape our lives. In a valley where ancient trees grew thick and tall, their branches forming a canopy that filtered sunlight into dancing patterns on the forest floor, there lived a woodcutter named Arjun. He was known throughout the region for his skill with an axe and for his ability to select exactly the right trees for different purposes: strong oak for construction, flexible willow for baskets, fragrant cedar for storage chests. Arjun took great pride in his work and in his deep knowledge of the forest. He could identify dozens of tree species by their bark alone, predict which trees would yield the best timber by examining their growth patterns, and navigate through the densest woodland without ever losing his way. But as the years passed, Arjun began to notice that his beloved forest was slowly shrinking. New settlements were expanding into the woodland, farmers were clearing land for additional fields, and other woodcutters were harvesting trees more rapidly than the forest could regenerate them. This recognition filled Arjun with deep concern. The forest was not just his livelihood, it was his home, his sanctuary, the source of everything that gave meaning to his life. The thought of losing it to careless exploitation horrified him. "I must do something to preserve the forest for future generations," he told his wife Mira one evening after returning from a day's work to find fresh stumps where a grove of young maples had stood the week before. Mira shared her husband's love for the woodland and supported his desire to protect it. "What do you think can be done?" she asked. Arjun had been thinking about this question for weeks. "I need to harvest the most valuable trees myself before others take them," he decided. "If I cut the finest specimens and store the wood carefully, I can preserve their value and ensure they are used properly rather than being wasted by less skilled woodcutters." This reasoning seemed sound to both of them. Rather than allowing precious trees to be destroyed by people who might not appreciate their quality or use them efficiently, Arjun would selectively harvest the best specimens and preserve their wood for truly worthy purposes. And so Arjun began what he thought of as a preservation project. Each day, he would venture into the forest and identify trees that he considered especially valuable. Old oaks with perfectly straight trunks, rare hardwoods that grew slowly and might not be found elsewhere, specimens with unusual grain patterns that would create beautiful finished products. Instead of cutting only what he needed for current orders, Arjun began harvesting these special trees and storing the wood in a large shed he built behind his house. He would cut the timber into various sizes, treat it to prevent decay, and organize it carefully according to species and quality. "I am saving the forest's treasures," he would tell himself as he worked. Each tree he cut was one that would otherwise be lost to less careful hands. Each piece of preserved timber was a victory against the wasteful destruction he saw happening around him. But Mira began to notice troubling aspects of her husband's preservation efforts. The shed behind their house grew larger and larger as Arjun filled it with carefully stored wood. He built additional storage structures to hold all the timber he was accumulating. Their property began to look like a lumber yard rather than a forest dweller's simple home. More concerning was the change in Arjun's daily routine, where once he had cut only what he needed and spent much of his time simply walking through the forest, observing the wildlife and enjoying the peaceful beauty of his woodland home. Now he spent every day cutting trees and processing lumber. "Husband," Mira said one evening, as they sat surrounded by the smell of fresh sawdust and the sight of timber stacks, "when did you last take time to simply sit quietly in the forest?" Arjun paused in his planning of the next day's cutting. "There is no time for that now," he replied. "Every day that I delay, other woodcutters might take trees that should be preserved. I must work quickly to save as much as possible." "But when will you use all this wood you are saving?" Mira asked, gesturing toward the expanding collection of stored timber. "When the right projects come along," Arjun answered. "When I find craftsmen who truly appreciate quality. When I meet customers who will use these materials for something worthy of their beauty." But months passed, and Arjun continued to cut and store while using very little of his preserved timber. The truly special projects he was waiting for never seemed to materialize, or when they did appear, he found himself reluctant to use his stored wood, preferring to save it for something even more worthy that might come in the future. Meanwhile, his daily cutting continued to accelerate. Each morning, he would survey the forest and identify more trees that needed to be saved from potential destruction by others. His preservation project had become a race against time, an urgent mission to rescue as much valuable timber as possible. The irony of this situation was lost on Arjun, but it was becoming increasingly apparent to others who knew the forest. One day, an old forester named Govind, who had worked in these woods for 40 years before retiring, came to visit Arjun's property. He walked slowly around the massive collection of stored lumber, examining the different species and noting the quality of the preserved wood. "You have accumulated quite a collection here, my friend," Govind observed. Arjun beamed with pride. "Yes, these are all trees that would have been wasted if I had not preserved them. Each piece represents a part of the forest saved for proper use." Govind nodded thoughtfully. "And how much of this wood have you used for actual projects?" The question made Arjun uncomfortable. "I am waiting for the right opportunities," he said. "These materials are too valuable to use for ordinary purposes." "I see," Govind replied. He gestured toward the forest beyond Arjun's property. "And how many trees are you cutting each week to add to this preserved collection?" Arjun calculated quickly. "Perhaps 15 or 20, depending on what I find. Sometimes more if I discover a particularly valuable grove." Govind was quiet for a long moment, studying the forest canopy with eyes that had observed its changes over many decades. "Arjun," he said finally, "in my 40 years of working in this forest, I have seen many changes. I have watched it shrink as you have. I have seen careless cutting damage entire groves. I have worried, as you do, about preserving its beauty for future generations." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But in all those years, I never saw anyone cut down trees as rapidly as you are doing now." The words struck Arjun like a physical blow. "But I am preserving them," he protested. "I am saving them from destruction." "Are you?" Govind asked gently. "Let me ask you this. What is the difference between a tree that is cut down by someone who wastes the wood and a tree that is cut down by someone who stores the wood indefinitely?" Arjun started to answer, then stopped. The question revealed something he had not wanted to examine. "From the forest's perspective," Govind continued, "both trees are equally gone. Both have been removed from the living ecosystem. The intention behind the cutting may be different, but the effect on the forest is the same." He walked closer to one of Arjun's storage sheds, running his hand along a stack of oak planks that had been drying there for over a year. "This was once a magnificent tree," he said. "It provided shade for animals, oxygen for the air, home for birds, beauty for anyone who walked beneath its branches. Now it lies here in your shed, serving no purpose except to wait for a use that may never come. How is this preservation? What exactly have you preserved?" The question hung in the forest air like morning mist, slowly penetrating Arjun's understanding. "I have preserved the wood," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Have you?" Govind asked. "Wood that is never used serves no more purpose than wood that is wasted. A tree that is cut down to be stored indefinitely is just as removed from the forest as a tree that is cut down carelessly." "But my intentions are good," Arjun said desperately. "I am trying to protect the forest." "Yes," Govind agreed, "your intentions are excellent. But let me ask you another question. In your effort to preserve the forest, how many trees have you personally removed from it in the past year?" Arjun thought back over the months of intensive cutting. The number was larger than he wanted to admit, perhaps 300 or 400 trees, all carefully selected, all preserved with great care, all stored with the best of intentions. "Now," Govind continued, "how many trees do you think the other woodcutters in this region have cut in the same time period?" Arjun considered this. There were perhaps 6 other woodcutters working in the area, most of them cutting only what they needed for specific orders or immediate use. Even working together, they probably had not removed as many trees as Arjun had cut in his preservation project. The realization settled over him slowly, like sunset shadows spreading across the forest floor. "I have become the biggest threat to the forest," he whispered. "In trying to save it, I have destroyed more of it than anyone else." Govind placed a gentle hand on Arjun's shoulder. "The forest needs trees that are living and growing, not wood that is stored and waiting. A forest preserved by cutting it down is not preserved at all. It is simply relocated." That evening, Arjun walked through his timber yard, looking at the stacks of carefully preserved wood with new eyes. Each plank represented a tree that was no longer growing, no longer providing habitat for wildlife, no longer contributing to the ecosystem he claimed to love. His preservation project had preserved nothing of what actually mattered about the forest. It had saved the wood while destroying the woodland, captured the timber while killing the trees, stored the material while eliminating the living system that created it. In his urgency to prevent the forest's destruction, he had become its most effective destroyer. The next morning, Arjun made a decision that was both difficult and liberating. He began contacting craftsmen, builders, and anyone who could use quality wood. Instead of waiting for perfect projects worthy of his stored timber, he started selling and giving away the lumber he had accumulated, ensuring that it would finally serve some useful purpose. More importantly, he changed his approach to working in the forest. Instead of cutting trees to preserve them from others, he began cutting only what was actually needed for current use. Instead of racing to harvest valuable specimens before competitors could take them, he began working with other woodcutters to establish sustainable practices that would allow the forest to regenerate naturally. He learned that true preservation meant leaving trees alive, not cutting them down for storage. That protecting the forest meant allowing it to continue growing, not collecting its products before others could access them. The deepest lesson was perhaps the hardest to accept: that good intentions, without wisdom about their actual effects, could produce results that were exactly opposite to what was intended. That the very urgency to save something could become the force that destroyed it. As he worked to undo the damage his preservation project had caused, Arjun often remembered Govind's gentle questions. They had revealed a truth that applied far beyond forestry, that sometimes our efforts to prevent a feared outcome create that very outcome more effectively than any external threat could have done. The forest, given a chance to recover from his well-intentioned assault, slowly began to regenerate. Young trees sprouted where old ones had been removed. Wildlife returned to areas that had been disturbed by his intensive cutting. The woodland ecosystem started to heal itself, demonstrating the resilience that Arjun should have trusted from the beginning. True preservation, he learned, often meant doing less rather than more, trusting natural processes rather than trying to control them, protecting by allowing rather than by taking. Take a gentle breath now and let these final stories settle into your heart like seeds in fertile soil. Feel how your body rests naturally, supported by forces you need not understand or control. These tales of unintended consequences, of good intentions creating unexpected results, mirror the complex dance of cause and effect that flows through every life, every choice, every moment of our existence. We have traveled together through stories of the salt merchant and the fabric trader, the Brahmin and the merchant father, the master craftsman and the generous farmer, the ambitious monk and the spice dealer, the protective woodcutter, all showing us how our actions ripple outward in ways we often cannot foresee. Each story a reflection of the Buddhist teaching that everything is connected, that every choice creates consequences, that wisdom lies not in avoiding action, but in acting with greater awareness of the full web of effects our choices create. The path forward is not to become paralyzed by the complexity of cause and effect, but to approach our choices with greater humility, greater attention, greater willingness to examine whether our methods are truly serving our intentions. To remember that sometimes the most compassionate action is the one that allows others to face their own challenges and find their own strength. That sometimes the most generous gift is the wisdom to know when not to give. That sometimes the most protective response is the one that trusts rather than controls. Rest now in this understanding, letting it work in you like gentle rain on thirsty earth. There is nothing you need to remember perfectly, nothing you need to figure out completely. These teachings will find their own way, their own timing, their own natural expression in your life when the moment is right. Your breath moves without effort. Your heart beats without planning. Your body rests without struggle. In the same way, wisdom works in you naturally, finding its own perfect timing, its own gentle way of transforming understanding into lived truth. The Buddha taught that all of life is interconnected, that no action exists in isolation, that every choice sends ripples through the vast web of existence. Tonight, we have seen how those ripples sometimes return to us in forms we never expected, teaching us lessons we never planned to learn. When Deepa tasted her salt to ensure its quality, she could not see that each small sample was part of a larger pattern that would consume what she meant to preserve. When Yash favored one son over another, he could not see how his love was creating the very problems he hoped his love would prevent. When Harish perfected his prayers while neglecting his compassion, he could not see how his spiritual practice was leading him away from spiritual truth. In each story, the intention was pure. The salt merchant wanted to deliver perfect salt. The father wanted his sons to flourish. The Brahmin wanted to honor the gods. The generous farmer wanted to help those in need. The master craftsman wanted to maintain excellence. The protective father wanted to spare his daughter from hardship. The ambitious monk wanted to achieve enlightenment. The worried spice trader wanted to protect his reputation. The woodcutter wanted to preserve the forest he loved. All of these intentions arose from genuine care, from real love, from sincere desire to create good in the world. Yet each became a source of suffering when pursued without wisdom about the full consequences of action. This is the teaching of karma in its deepest sense. Not that we will be punished for wrong actions, but that every action creates results, and those results shape the conditions for all future actions. The merchant who gives away her salt through constant testing finds herself with no salt to sell. The father who shows favoritism finds both his sons damaged by his unequal love. The Brahmin who perfects his rituals while neglecting his character finds his prayers becoming obstacles to the very spiritual development they were meant to encourage. The web of cause and effect is more intricate than any mind can fully comprehend. A single choice, to check the salt one more time, to praise one son more than another, to give help without wisdom, can set in motion a chain of consequences that unfolds over years, touching lives in ways we never imagined. But this complexity need not overwhelm us or paralyze us with fear of making mistakes. Instead, it can teach us to approach our choices with greater humility, greater attention, greater willingness to examine not just our intentions, but their actual effects in the world. The salt merchant learned that sometimes trust serves better than constant verification. The father discovered that equal treatment might be more loving than special favoritism. The Brahmin began to understand that authentic prayer transforms the one who prays, making them more compassionate in daily life. The generous farmer realized that true help strengthens rather than weakens those who receive it. Each of them found that wisdom often requires doing less rather than more, trusting rather than controlling, allowing natural processes to unfold rather than trying to force desired outcomes through sheer effort. Let your shoulders release any tension they may be holding. Feel how your body knows how to rest without any instruction from your mind. This natural ease, this effortless settling into peace, reflects the same wisdom that governs all of life when we learn to work with its rhythms rather than against them. There is a story from ancient times about a master archer who could split an arrow with another arrow, who could hit targets so small they could barely be seen. Students would come from distant lands to learn his technique, expecting to discover some secret method, some special way of holding the bow or aiming the arrow. But the master's teaching was simpler and more profound than they expected. The arrow knows how to find the target, he would tell them. My job is not to force it there, but to create the conditions that allow its natural flight to be true. Proper stance, clear sight, relaxed grip, smooth release. When I try to control the arrow's path, I disturb it. When I trust its nature and simply provide the right conditions, it flies straight. The same is true of all action in life. When we understand the natural laws of cause and effect, when we align our choices with the way things actually work, rather than the way we think they should work, our actions become effortless and effective. The salt need not be tasted constantly if it was good when we packed it. Children develop best with consistent love rather than dramatic favoritism. Prayers bear fruit when they change the heart of the one who prays. Help heals when it strengthens rather than creates dependency. Excellence emerges when we trust the process rather than forcing the outcome. This is the deepest wisdom of karma. Not that we are victims of cosmic punishment, but that we are participants in a vast dance of cause and effect that responds to wisdom and compassion, that rewards understanding with harmony, that teaches us through the consequences of our choices. Your breath continues its gentle rhythm, requiring no effort, no management, no improvement from you. Like your breath, wisdom works naturally when we stop interfering with its flow. The teachings we have shared tonight will continue working in you as you sleep, finding their own way into your understanding, their own expression in your daily choices. Feel your jaw relaxing, your face softening, your mind releasing its grip on the day's concerns. There is nothing you need to figure out, nothing you need to remember perfectly. The seeds of wisdom plant themselves, water themselves, grow themselves in the rich soil of an open heart. In the deepest silence of night, when the busy mind finally rests, truth speaks in whispers that penetrate more deeply than any loud declaration. These stories work like that, not through force or insistence, but through gentle recognition, quiet understanding, the slow dawn of awareness that changes everything without seeming to change anything at all. The Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree and realized that all suffering comes from not understanding how things actually work, from trying to control what cannot be controlled, from grasping what cannot be held, from forcing what flows naturally when we step aside and allow it. He saw that every being is already complete, already perfect, already connected to the same source of wisdom and compassion. But this perfection becomes obscured when we act from ignorance of how cause and effect actually operate in our lives. When we understand karma, not as judgment, but as natural law, not as punishment, but as teaching, not as something that happens to us, but as something we participate in with every choice, then our actions become expressions of wisdom rather than reactions of fear. We give not from obligation, but from understanding our interconnection. We refrain from harm, not from rule following, but from seeing clearly how harm returns to the one who causes it. We practice patience, not from suppressing anger, but from recognizing that anger burns the one who holds it more than anyone else. We choose our actions not based on what we think should happen, but on what we understand will actually happen when we plant these particular seeds in the soil of reality. This is freedom, not the ability to do anything we want without consequences, but the wisdom to choose actions that create the conditions for peace, for joy, for the flourishing of all life. Let your whole body soften now, settling deeper into rest with each breath. Feel yourself held by the same forces that hold the stars in their courses, the same peace that exists in the center of every storm, the same stillness that underlies all movement. You are part of this vast web of interconnection, this infinite dance of cause and effect. Every kind word you speak sends ripples of kindness through the world. Every moment of patience you cultivate creates space for patience in others. Every choice made from wisdom rather than fear adds to the sum of wisdom in existence. You need not be perfect in this participation. The web is strong enough to hold your mistakes, patient enough to teach through your errors, generous enough to offer endless opportunities for learning and growth. The salt merchant learned to trust her own careful preparation instead of constantly testing it. The father discovered how to love both sons equally instead of favoring one. The Brahmin found ways to make his prayers and his daily actions consistent expressions of the same spiritual intention. The generous farmer began helping others in ways that strengthened them rather than creating dependency. Each of them transformed their understanding of how their actions affected the world around them. Each learned to work with the natural laws of cause and effect rather than against them. Each discovered that wisdom lies not in perfect control but in skillful participation in the dance of life. You too are learning this dance. perhaps more fully tonight than ever before. With each story, each recognition, each gentle settling into understanding, you become more attuned to the subtle rhythms of action and consequence, intention and result, choice and outcome. This attunement does not happen through force or urgency. Like a flower opening to sunlight, like a child learning to walk, like a river finding its way to the sea, wisdom develops naturally when the conditions are right. Tonight, you have created those conditions: stillness of body, quietness of mind, openness of heart. In this space, understanding can take root and grow in its own time, in its own way. Your eyelids may be growing heavy now, your thoughts becoming softer and more distant. This is perfect. This is exactly how wisdom enters, not through the busy analyzing mind, but through the deep receptivity that comes in moments of profound rest. Let sleep come as gently as morning mist settling on still water. Let these teachings work in you as naturally as seeds work in dark earth, requiring no effort from you, no remembering or rehearsing, no trying to hold on to insights that will find their own way into your life when the time is right. Everything is already complete. You are already whole. The wisdom you need is already present within you, waiting to emerge like spring flowers from frozen ground, like stars appearing as darkness deepens, like peace revealing itself when all struggle finally ceases. In the vast silence that holds all sound, in the perfect stillness that contains all movement, in the deep rest that embraces all activity, you are held, you are home, you are exactly where you need to be. The stories end, but their wisdom continues. The words fade, but their truth remains. The night deepens, but your understanding grows brighter, like a lamp that burns more steadily as the oil settles, like a bell that rings more clearly as the air becomes still. Rest now in this knowing. Rest in the perfect sufficiency of this moment. Rest in the understanding that cause and effect, karma and consequence, choice and outcome are all expressions of a love so vast and intelligent that it uses even our mistakes as opportunities for learning, even our struggles as invitations to grow. Sleep well, knowing that you are part of something infinitely larger and more beautiful than you can comprehend, yet something so intimate that it knows every breath you take, every dream you dream, every moment of peace you find in the gentle darkness of rest. The moon sets, the stars wheel overhead, the earth turns in its ancient rhythm. You belong to all of this, and all of this belongs to you. In the democracy of sleep, all beings rest in the same peace, all hearts beat with the same life, all breath moves with the same source. Thank you for joining us at Sleepy Monk, for opening your heart to these teachings, for allowing wisdom to work in you as naturally as rain soaking into thirsty ground. May your sleep be deep, your dreams be peaceful, and may you wake with greater understanding of the beautiful dance of cause and effect that connects us all. Sleep well.